Welcome, everyone. We're in August 2024 between the Republican convention and the Democratic convention ahead of the US election taking place on November 5th this year. So I'm taking the time to kind of have an overview now that things have changed so dramatically in the past few weeks. Now, before I dive into the different observations, which are very interesting in the light of the fact that we now know who the running mates are, but also who the actual nominees will be. We will have a new panel of astrologers discussing the election astrological dynamics scheduled for October 5th. Myself, Bill Meridian, who is an expert on eclipses and mundane astrology, as well as Julia Simas from Australia, will be exploring the different dynamics before, about a month before the election. So this is going to be part two. We had our first panel in January 2024. Very interesting observation. Two of the panelists mentioned that Biden would step down around the summertime. So really interesting affirmations that you can review, and that's on my YouTube channel. So now we have new charts to look at. Some of these charts we have the birth time for, and some are just noon chart. And when I don't have a birth time, what I usually do is put the sun as the first house. So whatever the sun degree is of that candidate, that's the first house that we're going to use. And that's going to apply more specifically to Tim Walz, because we don't have his time of birth. Now, I want to share these insights, but I also know this is a sensitive topic, politics, elections, we all have our favorites. And I often get the dislike buttons or critiques that I'm biased in my analysis. And let me just address this very quickly, that of course I'm biased. I am not a robot just yet. So if you want a completely unbiased perspective, the time will come when AI will do our work and maybe we'll get better results. Maybe not. In the meantime, I want to just say that the fact that we all have bias does not mean the analysis is not valid. It simply means that we do have our, representative that represents our values more than another. And that's fair enough. That should not cloud our interpretation. And of course, maybe to some degree it does, but I do try to be as objective in my analysis, even though everybody knows I think Trump is a menace to society. So let's proceed and from this perspective, look at the charts. We're going to look at Donald Trump and the chosen running mate, J.D. Vance. And all of you may know right now that J.D. Vance initially was very hostile to Donald Trump and wrote, how incompetent, how difficult, how a threat he is to the world. And then, he changed his ideas and he warmed up to Trump, and he's now selected as his running mate. But if we look at the charts, it's very revealing that there is a very deep karma between these two. First of all, J.D. Vance has his sun in Leo exactly on Trump's Pluto. So right there, there's a history, and we speak about past life history because obviously, they didn't work together. They were not tied together until this time. But you see that when there are such correlations, and especially very precise, the same degree, you understand that his animosity and his initial dislike of Donald Trump may not have been superficial, only about, oh, he's a difficult person. There may be an earlier experience of betrayal, at least some kind of abandonment issue. And, looking just at Vance's natal chart, not only does he have that sun at 10 Leo, but it squares Saturn at 10 Scorpio. So he has serious father issues. Sun and Saturn are father-related authority figures. And we see here a major emotional crisis related to father figures, whether it's a disappointment, a loss, a betrayal, abandonment. So right there, he's already born with a charge. And that also applies to him as a father. Hopefully he learned from the mistakes of his own father not to repeat. But we see that there's something really unresolved about, especially Leo, measuring up to the expectations, feeling that he is respected, recognized, and that people like him. So that Sun Saturn is, packed with a lot of insecurities about his performance and about his ability to be appreciated. So when Trump's Pluto lands on his sun, it becomes a sore spot. It becomes, Donald Trump is going to reactivate Vance's natal wound related to father figures. And obviously, in this case, it's a professional father figure, but Trump falls into that category. And so that's one thing. The other thing we notice is that it's interesting they share the same ascendant. I think a fellow astrologer named Mark Cullen managed to find the birth time of J.D. Vance. So that 8:11 a.m. time is valid, and having the same ascendant is a strong point, especially in Leo, especially on the fixed star Regulus, which is a star that represents royalty and leadership and prestige. Quite often people born with strong Regulus activations can feel that they want to do something very special with their lives. There may be past lives again of nobility. Quite often also Regulus can, because of that past of nobility, can also represent a sense of immunity. The fact that Trump gets away with everything. And even though he's prosecuted, even though he's found guilty of several crimes, and he gets away with things. And that's, in my perspective, related to that Regulus on his ascendant, which kind of gives him a pass, for better and worse. Obviously, if you don't like him, it's for the worse. But having the same ascendant brings that affiliation, the fact that, they did choose each other after all, and that there is, in a Leonian way, an aspiration to lead and to be representing the people. So it's very ambitious, it's very creative, but it's also competitive. Now, Mars, we all know in Trump's chart, is on his ascendant on the 12th house side. And we know Trump is kind of a big personality, comes on strong, abrasive, defiant, causes strife wherever he goes. There's division and there's polarization. So it's both the charisma, the shameless, you know, uh, going for things, and, lack of restraint. And at the same time, it is also his divisive personality. In the 12th house, it's part of his, when you have a planet on an angle, it becomes very, very dominant in your chart. So even though, Trump is a Gemini and has other things in his chart, that Mars is what we see. Everybody see him as a fiery person, as an extroverted person, as, someone who is defiant. So all these Mars in Leo qualities are the first impression that Trump's radiates. And that's part of what happens when planets are on angles. They take over, they become very prominent. The fact that it's in the 12th house brings this martyrdom. The fact that he, in his defiance, he feels victimized. Everybody's against him. The media, doesn't like him. And so there's a lot of glamour, Leo, around this martyr personality. And the feeling that it's everybody else's fault, never his. Now, what's interesting is that Mars will also be on Vance's ascendant. So if it was just having ascendants conjunct, that, is definitely a good fuel. But the fact that Trump's Mars is on the angles adds this competitive edge. I think that if Vance becomes too popular, Trump, will sabotage him. And at the same time, Trump will not let Vance, do things without his approval, obviously. But what the way we can interpret this is that fear of outshining one another, which can be in that conjunction. Now, more drama. Vance's Mars is on the angles too, but in Scorpio. So Vance's Mars sits on his IC, which is one of the most vulnerable place in the zodiac. It's a Mars in Scorpio. It squares his Venus. I don't know enough about his, early childhood history, but this speaks about rupture. And it speaks again, it brings back this motif of abandonment, of rupture, of separation, some kind of wound of abandonment, but also a wound related to mistrust, violations of trust. Whether he's the perpetrator, whether he is the opportunist, Mars in Scorpio can be the opportunist, hungry for power. Whoever throws me the bigger bone, I'm going to go for them, which is a little bit of what happened when he changed his view about Trump to be the running mate. It's a form of opportunism. But that Mars on the IC can show a rupture from your home base, fourth house, which in a political sense means your own party. So both of these candidates have Mars on their angles, and those two Mars square each other. This is flammable. I wrote here a match made for the housewives of Washington, D.C. It is going to be ongoing drama. It's possibly the worst choice for Trump's as a running mate. And I'm not just talking about that astrologically. It's not a safe choice. And I'm not talking about the fact that, again, I'm biased, I don't like him, and that's why I'm saying that. The astrology speaks for itself. The analysis is showing there's tremendous tension, developmental tension. Now, it is true that when people have strong Mars squares, think about Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. They have Mars square. And it is true that when people like that have this synastry, if they have a common enemy, they rally their Mars to fight the enemy. So in this case, it's the Democrats. So they can use that Mars to, that Mars square to kind of externalize their aggression towards the common goal of defeating the blues. But the moment there isn't a common enemy, that those two Mars start an internal war. And it can be, in fixed signs, intensely destructive. You see what happened with Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, who, as long as they were there to save the world, to make changes, to adopt children, to support civil rights and whatnot, they really got along. And they met on the set of the Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which was all a Martian themed movie. But the moment, that the ambition to kind of make the world a better place and change things subsided, and they were more focused on family right after their marriage, that's when it became hostile. And they became bitter enemies, to the point where now the children are alienating from their father. And so when you have this Mars square on the angles, it's a dominant Mars, you can expect that there is going to be, at some point, a split. There is going to be adversity, and these two will detest each other at some point. When, if Trump doesn't win, he's going to blame it on Vance and the rest of the world, and the rest of the system and whoever. But, if when there's going to be trouble, when things are not going to be glamorous anymore, the blame game will be intensified. If they do win the election, it's all going to be this strong alliance, but soon enough, you'll start to see the cracks. You'll start to see adversity. You'll start to see competition. You'll start to see undercutting. And I would say, honestly, even though I don't like Trump, I will say that Vance is more dangerous as far as the betrayal, because that Mars in Scorpio in the fourth house is passive aggressive. When when you deal with Trump, you know what's in front of you. He's honest in his abrasive character. So you know who you're up against. with Vance, it's a very watery Mars in the fourth house. So his attacks are insidious, they're unexpected, and you might not see them coming. It's more behind the scenes, so to speak. So I suspect that there may be, you know, a lot of anger that's going to be harbored over time that may come out at some point through kind of insidious actions and betrayal. So, you know, prepare the popcorn. Hopefully, this will not be something that will spill into the public, you know, that will not harm the greater public. You know, if they have unfinished karmic issues, it's between them, and let it be so. There are positive connections as far as both of them, interestingly, sharing the same nodal axis in Sag Gemini, and synchronicity has it that Trump is a Uranus on the North node in Gemini, and Vance is a Uranus on the South node in Sagittarius. So they don't have the same degree, but they have the same axis and Uranus on the node. So when a planet is on the node, it also is instrumental in the development and dominance. So both Mars and Uranus are strong in both their charts. So what does that mean to have Uranus on the nodes? You know, it is that there are two different aspects to Uranus. Number one, it's the community dynamic, being part of a party. You know, Uranus has to do with, in a political sense, with the Republican Party or any other party the person belongs to. So the fact that Uranus is on their nodes speaks about the need to work through the party, to work as team, as a community, to represent a, you know, a common agenda. That's for number one. Number two, it also represents, obviously, the need for change, the calling for change, the feeling of alienation, because the person with a strong Uranus feels like they want to upgrade things, to develop things. And, you know, they all believe in their own ways that they are change makers, even though they're, you know, we're talking about reversing abortion rights. We're talking about reversing environmental policies and all that is related to exploitation of nature and the you know, disregard for human rights. Now, this is what appeals to many Trump supporters, is his Uranus, is the fact that he is alienated from the system and comes across as a wild card, you know, someone who is going to change the system and do things that are controversial. You know, some people call that draining the swamp. What they don't realize is that with Mars on the ascendant and Pluto in the 12th house, Trump may try to drain the swamp, but he's going to bring another swamp. That is what quite often many people don't realize about him, is that as he's bringing this Uranian change, he is not really solving the problem because he is corrupt. So as he tries to change corruption, he will bring another type of corruption. So it's almost like, you are trying to resolve a problem, and you're inviting the devil to basically uh, take care of your problems, and then you're stuck with a worse problem. It's like calling the mafia to eliminate your enemy, but then they will bind you and all of that. So basically, that Uranus on the nodes can indeed represent a common goal for them to, in their view, bring the change that they want to bring. Now, another thing I want to bring up, looking at Trump's chart, let's look at the assassination attempt took place in July. That took place during the Mars-Uranus conjunction in Taurus, around July 18. So here I'm going to talk about the assassination attempt that preceded the Republican convention. This happened on July 13 as Mars in Taurus got close and eventually conjunct Uranus in Taurus. And lo and behold, the assassin, the one who attempted to assassinate Trump, if we go by the narrative, is born with a Mars-Uranus conjunction. And that Mars-Uranus happens to oppose Trump's Mars, right on his angle. So you see how planets on angles, whether they're yours or there's somebody you live with or somebody who's trying to assassinate you, how potent planets on angles are. So this is so graphic to see this opposition. And of course, Mars in Pisces are not very precise, and so he missed. But there's also a past life story here, and I'm going to get to that. What is very important as well is that Thomas Crook's Pluto happens to be on Trump's south node, opposing his Uranus in Gemini. And so he's a Republican, possibly disillusioned. I'm not sure we got the motives and if he revealed why he did what he did. But from a Plutonian point of view, there's obviously some form of animosity, distrust, and maybe he saw Trump as someone who did not, represent Republican values. Now, you see Crook's north node is at 22 degrees Taurus. That's very close to where the conjunction of Mars-Uranus happened, you know, during this tragic event. So once again, planets on nodes, planets on angles, dramatic, important. This is a fellow astrologer, Heidi Domison, who brought this to my attention, that Trump, Vance, and Thomas Crooks share the same pre-eclipse degree of 8 to 9 Gemini. So what is a prenatal eclipse? It's the eclipse that occurred, the solar eclipse in this case, that occurred before you were born, and that kind of sets the tone for all the births that are coming between that eclipse and the next. And so you have to realize Trump is born in 1946. The Thomas Crooks was born in 2003, and Vance was born in 1984. So the fact that they were all born under the same prenatal eclipse is extremely rare. You know, they were not born in the same generation. You would say if they're born, you know, a few weeks or months from each other, chances are they're going to have the same prenatal eclipse. But here they are born years apart. And what happens is that these eclipse degrees return every 19 years. 46 to 80. So Trump is born in 1946. 38 years later, twice 19, Vance is born in 1984. 19 years later, Thomas Crook is born in 2003. So they're all born at at this 19-year gap between their birth. And that is what we call at astrology a metonic cycle of eclipses. So these eclipses can return 3 to 4 times every 19 years, and then it shifts. So it's very unusual, to have these 3 individuals show up within, a couple of weeks, within the same week. Trump gets shot at, and then the Republican convention is the following weekend. And that's when Vance comes to the scene. So what is a Gemini? Interestingly, it's also very close to the fixed star Aldebaran. Aldebaran, keeper of the East, is a fixed star that represents royalty and represents what we call a royal star. So there's that. The other thing is that that degree, 8 to 9 Gemini, is the degree of the Pluto-Neptune conjunction. Every 500 years, Pluto-Neptune conjunct. And the last time was in the late 1893. So the degree of their conjunction basically sets the tone for the next 500 years. And that was the degree, 8 Gemini. So people who have, important placement around that degree can tap into those greater collective cycle that affect humanity. So the 8-degree Gemini is a degree that captures that larger Pluto-Neptune theme. I won't get too much into that right now because, it's going to take hours to unpack. But that's a reality. And then the asteroid karma, the day of the shooting was at 23 Gemini. Oh, that's Trump's sun. And Thomas Crook's natal asteroid karma position is 25 Gemini. So Trump's sun is on his karma asteroid. And so there's this repetition of that karma. So like we say, quite often when we have these, intense activation, there's more than, the superficial occurrences. There's, the deeper past life history, unresolved issues that are being replayed for us. Now, if you want to follow, more of these discussions, join my group on Facebook called Evolutionary Skies. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Before I move to fully into Kamala Harris, it was interesting to note that in that brief period of time when these were the contenders before Joe Biden stepped down, it's interesting to see that the Mars placements were mirroring each other, as Biden has Mars in Scorpio, Kamala has Mars in Leo, Trump has Mars in Leo, and Vance has Mars in Scorpio. And that's the highest statistical placement for US presidents, having Mars in these two signs. And now Biden stepped down, talking about Mars Uranus in Taurus was opposing his sun in Scorpio. So took its toll, and perhaps for the better, he stepped down. I was personally really frowning upon that, because how the Democrats were basically at Biden's throat because he didn't perform well at the debate. But when Trump is not performing well, his party is supporting him unconditionally. So there's something about the Democrats who are really not very good cheerleaders. A lot of self-sabotage there. But, fate has it that we now have a new exciting development with possibly a first woman of color leading the ticket. So looking at Kamala and then Tim Walz, it's interesting that she's a Libra with an Aries moon, born very, very close, almost a perfect full moon. And all the eclipses, this past couple of years have been in Aries. and Libra. So the nodes are now in Aries Libra, and we see the prominence of Aries Libra figures, whether it's Kamala and Tim, whether it's Putin, who's a Libra, Netanyahu, who's a Libra, the Bangladesh president, prime minister, Sheikh Hasida, if I'm saying it right, who was kicked out after 15 years in office following a student protest, is also a Libra. So Libras and Aries are on the map, and that can elevate them. When you have eclipses in a sign, you have unexpected surges and development. Things happen unexpectedly, and you can be elevated to positions of leadership, to, very powerful offers. But eclipses can also eclipse you and take you down, just like happened to the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. So we see that for them, it worked so far in this kind of a elevation, visibility, and tremendous popularity as she's raising, record amounts of money. Is it all hype? Is it just the excitement? Is there really substance behind it? Is she really capable to lead? She's going to have to prove herself, and we'll see. So far, they have a very strong ticket. And if we look at the synastry, let's unpack the same way we did with the previous candidate. So gladly, we don't see a Mars-Mars square. We don't see Mars on the angles. However, Kamala has the nodes on the angles. In Sagittarius Gemini, same as Trump, same as Vance, same as, no, not Thomas Cook. So this theme of Gemini Sag is really strong. And think about the fact that one of her identities is that she's a multicultural person. So Gemini Sagittarius bring that multiplicity of culture, that blend of different culture, which is what, part of her, part of what she represents, the union of diversity. Now, how do they work together? As Aries and Libra, he is a strong Aries. He's a Mars, Sun, Jupiter in Aries. All the fire, Mars is fire, Sun is fire, Jupiter is fire, in fire signs. On her moon, the Jupiter. So that's part of the vitality that you feel, that kind of surge of energy and excitement and something new and fresh. So Aries can be very powerful when you bring something new. So this whole stepping down of Biden and suddenly Kamala coming through, and she's the first, woman of color to be a contender. That serves the Aries new, fresh energy. The question is, does it have steam to go the long road, to keep that kind of momentum, not just for the election, but if they are elected, to go for the 4-year. So one of the things we don't understand about Aries is that Aries are very devotional. They are very dedicated, passionate. So when they like you, they adore you. But when they don't like you, they can get upset and flare up. So you see Tim's Mars at 6 degrees Aries is square his own nodes at 5 degrees Cancer Capricorn. So we see that he is someone who is a doer. He's very straightforward. Give him a goal, he's going to execute it. He's a coach. So all this Aries energy is all about let's do, let's change, let's be an activist. The activism of, that drives politics as well. But it is also that tendency for him to get ahead of himself. Mars in Aries pushing things too strongly, and then the Capricorn Cancer nodes holding him back and saying, wait a minute, are you appropriate? Are you pushing too strongly? Are you going too far? And so he can get frustrated that he wants things done and he needs to kind of hold back and think before he acts. So there's a tendency for flaring up. Number two, his Jupiter is in Aries, which is on the one hand, on her moon. So he's elevating her. He's definitely the cheerleader. And he can be a great supporter for her, being an Aries moon, elevating the feminine. The Aries moon is a woman who is going to be the trailblazer. So his Jupiter comes and fans her flames and makes her special. And, it's all what we see currently happening. But think about the fact that during the elections, Mars is going to be in Cancer, 29, 28, 29 Cancer. Pluto is going to be 28, 29 Capricorn. So that's going to square that Jupiter. I'm going to talk more about that on our panel on October 5. But one of the virtues of Jupiter in Aries is great courage. These folks are activists and they are not afraid of anything. It's incredibly adventurous and it's incredibly courageous. But one of the risks of Jupiter in Aries is being blunt to a fault, is saying things too quickly, and it is basically quite often being inappropriate. Blurting out things that are possibly, like we say, inappropriate. So we'll see what happens during the debates, and we'll see what happens during the campaign as this Mars-Pluto squares his Jupiter and squares Kamala's moon, if there are going to be some gaffes, some situations where he's going to get ahead of himself again. Now, the other thing that they need to figure out as they are a team is that she's a Libra sun and conjunct Mercury in Scorpio. Additionally, her Mars squares Neptune. So what this means as a Libra is that she is much more reserved. She's not rushing to things. Libra are hesitant. They're weighing all sides. As far as decision making, they want to come to a balanced decision. And so, and Mercury in Scorpio are not super communicative. They keep their cards to themselves. They don't always share their intentions openly. And so you can see that Kamala is not necessarily going to be outgoing as Tim is. That can be a good balance, but I suspect that she won't always include him. And that he's going to be frustrated because he's like, okay, tell me, let's do it. We talked about that. Now I'm ready. What are we waiting for? And she's going to be like keeping him out of the loop sometimes and possibly not being as straightforward as he is. So there can be some frustration on his part. And there you see that kind of dichotomy between Aries and Libra, where one, Aries, is kind of sure, everything's clear, I know what my goals are, I know what we're trying to achieve. And Libra is just, is more like, but wait, let's weigh all sides, and maybe we can actually change our decisions. So it's not as direct and straightforward. Will that be, part of their creative tension? Will that be a time where he's going to be very frustrated, or she's going to be frustrated that he's impatient? Who knows? But it's there, that there's a tendency, and, at least we don't, even though we see those discrepancies and those gaps, we don't see that the adversity is as fierce, as confrontational as it is with Vance and Trump. So chances are, if there are problems, it's not as vicious. It's not, as dramatic. At least that it appears so. Now, I mentioned eclipses. So Vance, excuse me, Tim Walz is going to have, had in April, the eclipses on his sun, and boom, he's the chosen one. So don't think that eclipses are necessarily a bad thing. They can elevate you. The other interesting thing is that his Venus in Gemini squares her MCIC. So again, Venus locking on angles brings opportunity for cooperation, alliances. It's in Gemini, so that eases on the risk of problematic communication. That Venus kind of softened the edges. So the Democratic nomination is happening now, as you're watching this video, around August 19 to 22. That's when she's going to officially say it. And you see Mars is going to be on her ascendant, North Node. And interestingly, that's also Trump's solar degree, 22 Gemini. Additionally, the sun is going to be on her angle, on her IC. So again, fourth house, home, her party, being the leader of her house, sun in the fourth. But it's interesting that Jupiter is in Gemini. And so many astrologers said that that gives an advantage to Trump because he's a Gemini. But Kamala's a North Node and ascendant in Gemini. So now they're on equal footing as far as the Gemini-Jupiter goes. Initially, I thought that Biden would be nominated because the sun for the nomination was on his North Node exactly. So that was a sign of leadership. But yeah, other things took over and kind of I would say neutralize. That's the word I was looking for, neutralize that. Additionally, Saturn is going to be opposing, on top of her chart. So leadership, authority, Saturn opposing her Venus. We see that as she rises into power, the dynamics of her personal relationships will be affected. She's not going to be home a lot. And so that could be part of what happens here with this opposition. And she has a Ceres return. Now, Ceres is also strong for female women in position of leadership. So it makes sense. Another thing to pay attention to is, again, you see she was born with Jupiter at 24 degrees Taurus. And if you go back in April, we had a Jupiter-Uranus at 24 degrees Taurus. So she had a Jupiter return earlier this year with Uranus. And 3 months later, she becomes the nominee for the Democratic Party with strong chances of winning the election. This teaches us, astrologers, that sometimes these activations can be happening before they are exact or after they're exact. You know, in April, when this actually took place, it was more or less business as usual for her. Maybe there were internal things that we're not aware of publicly, and that maybe she made a lot of money, maybe she bought Bitcoin, you know, I don't know. But the fact that she ascended rapidly and surprisingly following a Uranus-Mars transit on that initial Jupiter degree tells us that the degree of the conjunction stays strong over time. And she's proof of that. So another interesting factor is that we are now at a Saturn-Jupiter square. It's an opening square, so Jupiter is faster than Saturn. So the initial conjunction was in 2020, December 2020, when Biden won, and there was a change of leadership. And then soon after, the insurrection, Trump's followers storming the Capitol and, you know, causing this mayhem, as we know. So many dramatic shift of leadership and reluctance to accept the shift, and this need to kind of hold on to power. Jupiter and Saturn represent the leadership. They are the teachers of the zodiac. They represent law and order, integrity, and they are the role models. So when Jupiter and Saturn come together, there are always questions about either a new leader coming to town, or, you know, some shift of authority. That's the conjunction. Now we have the first quarter square. And the first quarter square is a test of leadership, is to see, okay, we started something new. Let's see if it holds. Let's see how strong it is. So it's kind of a test to see if we continue the way we seeded during the conjunction, or whether we need a change. So will Kamala, you know, prove that the Democrats are strong and that what they've done is reliable and proves itself, or will she fail to do that? We don't know just from the square. What we do know is that she's bringing the multicultural card, Gemini, to the agenda. Anyway, interestingly, they are both happening as the United States is also established. The Sibley chart has a Jupiter-Saturn closing square. So you see that Jupiter is advancing towards the conjunction. Now it's advancing away from the conjunction. And so interestingly, guess what? Trump is born with a Jupiter square Saturn, open square. And so is Kamala. How is that for amazing astrology synchronicities, where this Jupiter-Saturn square in the sky brings two candidates with a strong voice that both possess natally a Jupiter-Saturn opening square. So they're both needing to prove Jupiter-Saturn square, they're both needing to prove their points of view, their reliability, their credibility. People with Jupiter and Saturn need to constantly show that they're up for it, that they're strong enough, that they are reliable, that they're good leaders. And for her, in Aquarius, Taurus, it may play on an economic card. But it's interesting that she has it in Aquarius, Taurus, and Trump has it in the 11th house, which is an Aquarius house, and second house, which is a Taurus house. So by house and sign, they work on the same issues, the economy. Trump has it also in Cancer, Libra, which obviously has to do also with the alliance, the support that he gets or not from his own party. Saturn in Cancer in the 11th house, is my party supporting me? You see, there's division in the Republican Party. You see his ex-Vice President Pence is now a bitter enemy. So he is not convincing everyone that he's a good match. And so, it's part of the tension of the Cancer Libra square. Now, another thing I want to speak about, going back to Trump's chart. Obviously, we spoke about the risk of the risk of assassination. This is something I brought up in the first panel back in January. And I was really concerned, not necessarily in July, but I was concerned around the election, that there may be, a loose screw there who's going to try to fix the problems in violent ways. And because the atmosphere around the election is so volatile. But one thing we also need to pay attention to, and I'm going to show the chart now. Is that Trump has Uranus on his MC, and it is squaring his Mars. Now, it's one thing, to be on a campaign trail, and Uranus, can make you very public. It is also obviously, like we say, the risk of hostilities and people rebelling against him, Mars, Uranus. But there's also a threat of health risks. Mars square Uranus in Leo is vulnerable to strokes and heart attacks. And under the intense pressure that he's in, I mean, if you think about the man who was possibly, facing the risk of assassination, then jumping right after that into this whole convention and being on a campaign trail constantly at his age, it's a tremendous amount of stress. And he's not a healthy person, doesn't eat healthy, he's just cholesterol is off the chart. So that Uranus-Mars poses a health risk, especially cardiovascular. So as much as I am not his friend and I won't vote for him, I don't wish, any kind of tragedy on anyone. But it is a learning curve. If you see that, if you were using astrology to support candidates, to support democracy, to support healthy development, you would recommend that he gets tested. You would recommend that that he gets enough rest and things like that, and rather than push and push and push. So, we wish the best for all the candidates. First of all, may they be healthy and safe. And number two, may the one who is really the best for the United States and for the world to move ahead. I invite you on October 5th to join the panel with my colleagues, Julia and Bill, for more specifically a focus on the November 5th climate and results and so forth. It's going to be exciting, certainly interesting. Thank you, everyone.